Happy Cyber Monday, everyone. Thank you so much for taking a break from those online deals to join us for our second annual year in review call. So my name is Stephanie Bailey. I'm the development manager here at New Harvest, but you might know me better as Stephanie.b at newharvest.org. And that's actually one of the many reasons that I'm really excited for today's call, is to finally be able to put some faces to email addresses. I joined the New Harvest team this year, and so I'm really just glad to have the opportunity to kind of connect and really come together today, especially after yet another year of travel restrictions. So today we'll be sharing some highlights from this past year and then opening the floor up to questions so we can really kind of focus on talking with you rather than at you. Before we get started though, I just wanted to touch on three housekeeping items. Number one is, as we mentioned already, we will be recording the call, so cameras off, if you prefer not to be recorded, that is. But don't worry, we will be shutting off the camera before the Q&A session to make space for our camera shy friends. Housekeeping item number two is questions at the end. So if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to add them to the chat, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A. And third thing here is we would love to take a group shot after the Q&A. We'd love to document this call and immortalize it in a screenshot. So again, cameras off if you prefer at that time. But now, without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic on to our fearless leader, aka Executive Director of New Harvest, Isha Datar.
Thank you so much, Steph, and so nice to see so many new and familiar faces and typed out names and icons over here in the Zoom room. I'm just going to get my screen shared and hope nothing breaks in the process of doing that, and then we'll just get started. So here we go. All right. Can everybody see my screen? Can I see a couple thumbs up if you can see the slide? All right, awesome. Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. All right, let's get started. So why are we here today? Well, we're here today because we believe that cellular agriculture is a solution. We believe that it is a solution to all of the problems caused by mass producing animals for their bodies, or as we call them, animal products. And there are so many problems caused by mass producing animals that I could absolutely spend this whole hour talking about them. But instead, I'm just going to focus on three which really root me and ground me in the work that we do here at New Harvest, and which, if you've seen me present before, you've probably seen these images before too. But I think they're really important for us to remember so we don't lose sight of why we do this work. But for me, one big reason is the environment. As you can see from this overhead photo, over on the left, you have a cattle feedlot, and all of these tiny little dots are little cows. And over on the right, you have a waste lagoon, and this has happened because of all the manure that comes out of these cows. The way that we farm animals is effectively changing the surface of our planet, and in a very destructive way. And as you can see just from this single photo, the waste is just something we are not able to quantify. And I love this image because we can see this is the destruction of our planet in action. We don't have a circular relationship between the way we farm animals and our Earth anymore. A second big issue for me is public health. We know now more than ever what it's like to experience a pandemic, but epidemics have been sweeping through farmed animal populations pretty regularly year after year. And they may not always transfer over into the human populations, but they absolutely affect animal populations. And when this happens, not only do animals need to be culled, so we actually have to invent new ways to kill animals so that we can prevent the spread of disease. we also just lose a lot of those animal products too. So it is terrible for food security as well. And then the third reason is, of course, animal suffering. So whether you care deeply about the rights of animals or not, no one would want to spend 24 hours a day in an environment like this, 7 days a week. And what excites me the most about cellular agriculture is the prospect that we could move past this aspect of human history with our culinary traditions intact, but also with new culinary traditions in the future. So when I look at an image like this, I'm incredibly blown away, so excited and so amazed at what we are able to do with the technologies that make up cellular agriculture. We can have all these incredible products. None of these are animal products. These are all prototypes from people in the field working on producing animal products without animals. And what's exciting about it is they give us a means to end those problems that I just talked about. And last year, as our first year into the pandemic, we decided to change our mission. Our old mission was to build the field of cellular agriculture, which I think you could interpret as how do we get more of these products created in the world? And our new mission is, sorry, I'm not quite sure how to change the slides yet. Our new mission is to maximize the positive impact of cellular agriculture. And this is just acknowledging that these products alone will not change the things I just showed. These are just new products. And we must not lose sight that the impact that we want to see is actually about ending the mass production of animals at that scale, at that level of destruction, and not just putting new things in the world. So we have to link these two pieces together. So when we put together our new mission and our new strategic plan, we also articulated 3 new impact objectives to guide the work that we do. They're summarized here. The first one is mobilizing the ecosystem, which is creating productive venues to convene cellular agriculture stakeholders around key neglected topics. If you have been to or witnessed one of the New Harvest conferences in the past, this will resonate very strongly. But because we didn't do the conference the past 2 years, we've found other ways to mobilize the ecosystem and create that kind of venue for deeper dialogue, which I'm excited to talk about soon. The second big impact objective is collective value creation. This is really about co-creating resources, knowledge, and tools that have collective value for cellular agriculture, ecosystem, and beyond. We are very, very committed to open. We believe as a publicly funded organization that we should be creating assets that everyone can publicly access. So for us, it's not only about creating resources that everyone has access to, it's about co-creating them with several stakeholders who can come together and make that product or resource or knowledge better than any one of us could alone. And then last but not least, empowering emerging leaders. This is kind of our bread and butter, I would say. It's our work in training and supporting individuals towards field level leadership in roles that fortify. I hope someone's okay on the call somewhere.
I'm sorry. I'll mute my flu.
I'm sorry that you have one. This is really about training and supporting individuals towards leadership. So one of our strategies for impact is focusing on how do we empower people first and their projects second, knowing that the strategy to have ongoing change and ongoing impact in a nonprofit is really to support those champions that are going to ignite change well into the future. So for many of you who have followed New Harvest for a while, you'll know this is really about our grant programs. So now that you're a little bit oriented around our impact objectives, and before I talk about what we did this year, I have to talk about who did it. So our team was 11 strong this year. It's crazy for me to look at this slide because I remember when New Harvest was just 1 person, then 2 people, then 3 people. So we feel like a true team today. I'm just gonna read off the names and positions here and highlight that during the Q&A, if you have questions for any of us, please direct the questions to any of us by name. Lanto is our executive assistant. He does everything. He's the keeper of the keys and codes and passwords and everything that we need to do to make sure that we can actually operate. Bree is our research operations and outreach director. She does a lot of work on our research programs and much more. Almost no one does just one thing. I don't think anyone does just one thing. Morgan is our science communications intern. Jeremiah is our research program director. Dwayne is our director of responsible research and innovation. He's calling in from the Netherlands, where we're going to be opening up an office. Paige is our chief operating officer. Steph is our development manager, who you know from the intro. Michaela is our content production manager, who's responsible for the image of New Harvest that you see coming out of your screens from every platform. You know me, I'm the oldest news in this slide deck. And Jadira is our research collaborations director, and Mira is our communications and media manager. So now you know the characters, let's talk about the story of 2021. We'll start with our first impact objective, mobilizing the ecosystem. So because we didn't have the conference, we wanted to still find other ways to keep tabs on what was going on in the environment. I think one thing that New Harvest does really, really well is stay impactful by having our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the field. So we launched a listening campaign this year, kind of in response to our new strategic plan, to really get a sense of what the field's greatest needs were. Where are we as a field today, and what do we need to do to move forward? So far, we've listened to 65 CELAG stakeholders one-on-one in pretty intimate conversations about the field needs and what we need to do going forward together. But we really hope to extend that into people beyond CELAG. You know, maybe it is people who have conflicting viewpoints about CELAG. Maybe it is people who are adjacent to CELAG and could affect how CELAG comes into the world. That's going to be part of our practice going into 2022. We also had a really cool workshop with 35 CELAG industry leaders talking about how to de-risk the field, trying to kind of identify what are the things that are going to affect all of us and how could we work together to address them and de-risk them in a proactive way. Another kind of catch-all bullet point here is deepening the dialogue through public engagement. I'll just tell one story, even though there's so many. I was really proud of the work that Mira did this year on one particular article that came out in Forbes about open questions remaining to be answered in cellular agriculture, specifically around cultured meat. And the author of this article is one of the founders of the Non-GMO Project, which is a big certification program. You may recognize those little non-GMO labels on packages. This author wrote a really incredible set of questions that needed to be answered that would just build transparency in the field. And Mira helped coordinate one of our researchers, Andrew, in responding to this big list of questions in a very robust way. And then the original author did a podcast responding to the response. So I tell that story because it's a story of true engagement. It's not just about how many clicks we could get. It's really about deepening the dialogue and deepening the understanding of the field and trying to make the field better in the process. But if I were to highlight one big highlight in terms of dialogue deepening, it was the TED Talk that I was so happy and lucky to do this year as the first in-person post-pandemic TED conference. To be able to highlight the issues of animal agriculture and the cracks in animal agriculture that COVID made so present on stage was enormous. And to be able to put together a talk that was co-created with 49 CELAG leaders in the space was even better than just being up there alone. So what do I mean by 49 CELAG leaders helping prepare the talk? They provided imagery. So every slide that was shown on the TED stage came from people who are actually working in the field developing prototypes. They helped provide ideas of topics and points of view that haven't been really put out there on stage before. So it was really like a kind of crowdsourced talk in that respect. And they also provide some estimates. There's one part in the TED Talk where I talk about how far the price of cultured meat has come down. And those numbers really came from industry leaders. So it was very cool to bring the voices of so many people up on stage at TED this year. And to have that talk receive over 1 million views within the first month is just the cherry on top. All right, let's talk about the second thing, collective value creation, very in line with the TED Talk. This time, I really focused the collective value creation around our collaboration work this year. So we really started our collaborations as a kind of program this year. Around this time last year, Jadira joined our team, who is our research collaborations director. And in just 11 or 12 months, she's brought on more projects into New Harvest than I have in 8 years. So we've been participating in 22 big collaborations this year. 13 of them are academic grant projects. So these might be grants that independent university labs are working on, and we are helping kind of bolster their grant application or rally some researchers together for it. So always in a kind of supporting, facilitative role. 3 of those 13 grants have been funded so far, so very exciting progress. And then we've also joined 9 non-academic collaborative projects. So these are not grant projects. These are collaborations with cool new foundations or nonprofits that bring several groups together. I'll give you a little sense of what I'm talking about in a second. But our collaboration work has just expanded so much that another highlight for me was bringing on Dwayne. Dwayne is in the Netherlands. He's our first industry hire, formerly from Mosameat, and he's going to be expanding our collaborations work in Europe and Asia. So we're very excited about that. But here's a brief overview of what I mean by the collaboration. So last year, we did our huge safety initiative with 87 individuals from 50 different companies around the world. And this year, the paper was finally published in September. So it took over a year for that to come around and get published, accessible for everyone. But this paper has ignited a lot of projects for us. The first is we're putting together an online course to just increase access to the content of this paper and understanding around it. We're also developing a course in partnership with Northeastern University's Battle, led by Jared Auclair. This will be an in-person course that actually has university accreditation behind it. So we're very, very excited about that. We also assisted Ontario Genomics in preparing a report on what the cellular agriculture opportunity looks like in Canada in particular. This was awesome because it actually provided some numbers in terms of what this economic opportunity looked like in terms of money and jobs. So it was very cool to see. And a lot of the kind of leadership on this paper came from Dr. Lenore Newman's lab out of the University of Fraser Valley. And we've worked with Lenore Newman's lab in many different ways. We're also doing this grant with her at the Future Skills Center. This is about reimagining what cellular agriculture might look like in terms of jobs and providing food, specifically in the Fraser Valley. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Fraser Valley, it is in British Columbia. So many of us Canadians know that it is an environment that has experienced crazy fires and crazy floods this year. So there's a lot of hope in re-envisioning what does that environment look like when agriculture is completely different. Another huge, huge collaboration is with the X Prize. X Prize has put together a $15 million prize for teams around the world working on producing cell-cultured and plant-based alternatives to chicken and fish in particular. And our former research director, Dr. Kate Kruger, is the cell ag leader here. So I'm sure we're affiliated with this because of her generosity. But this is a really huge project that's already brought in dozens of teams from around the world. And then last but not least is the Science Catalyst program that I'm going to say a little bit more about this at the end, but it's a collaboration with Robert Downey Jr.'s foundation, the Footprint Coalition, and Experiment Foundation. And this is for us to fund some cool new research in cellular agriculture, specifically around the social sciences. So the next, this is arguably the bread and the butter and the meat of our organization, our work in empowering emerging leaders. So this is really about our researchers and our research grants. So if you've been following New Harvest, our researchers are really the people who do the real work around here. This is really based around the thesis that researchers and scientists are the limiting factor in cellular agriculture. And the more that you can empower scientists to dedicate their work to cellular agriculture, the more progress we can make in this field. So in this next set of slides, I'm going to talk about where our research programs came to this year in terms of the new grantees that we onboarded. I'm also going to talk about how far we've come with this program kind of in total, because it is definitely a long game type of program. Then I'm going to talk about an incredible success of several of our grantees. And then I'm going to talk about why the heck we decided to stop this at the top of our game. And so for those of you who aren't aware, in maybe Q2 or so, we made an announcement that we are not going to be accepting more applications for our existing grant programs, and we're going to reimagine what our fellowship looks like. So I will explain all the thinking behind that and why it's not as crazy as it sounds soon. So the highlight reel, in 2021, we onboarded 9 new grantees. We supported a community of 34 active grantees, many of which are here in Bitmoji form, some of whom are here on the Zoom call. I saw some names there. This is our cohort of researchers, and not only do we support each of the researchers kind of individually in their labs where they are, we also create venues for them to connect with one another. A lot of them connect through New Harvest Slack and programming that we put together. We also saw 11 grantees complete their program, so it was a big year for these kind of graduations. And we published 6 papers, bringing the New Harvest paper list total to 25, and we have 21 in progress. So I share those 3 numbers just to give a sense of how much our publication is just exponentially growing thanks to the work of our researchers and just how long it takes to publish a paper and put together the research for it. So let me give you a quick overview of who joined our fellowship and our grantee community this year. Now, I don't have time to dig into each of these projects because they are so cool that I just cannot do any decent justice to them talking about them here. But we will share a link to our projects page if you'd like to dig in a little bit deeper. Our fellowship program grew by 4 fellows, Dawn, Freya, Mia, and Irfan, who are all doing incredible research in the field in Canada, Germany, and in the USA. So very excited for all 4 of them to join. We also brought on 3 seed grantees, Shravya, Brody, and Ashton, and 2 dissertation awardees, Varsha and Bianca. So it was, I mean, this is the most grantees we've ever brought on in a year. So it's been a very exciting year. Now, this is when I talk a little bit about why we support research. Supporting research and research grants is playing a long game. I mean, each of our fellowships is usually around 3 years long. So we start making a pretty big commitment to our researchers from the beginning and don't often see the results per se until 3 years later. So when you support New Harvest and when you enable us to play the long game, this is what happens. You grow a global research network. So in supporting these 3-year-long projects, there's tons of overlap. We're only really seeing our grantees starting to kind of finish around now. So we have this huge network all around the world of researchers connected to one another around this shared goal of making cellular agriculture work. You also create an information ecosystem. So I did this little montage of the papers just to emphasize how important papers are. Publications are our public knowledge of the field. They're important not only to industry, who I know actively reads these papers as soon as they are published. They're also very important to policymakers and regulators and people trying to understand the field from the outside, who are, bearing judgment on the field in terms of how safe it is, or, what needs to be done in government or policy to make room for it. These papers also encourage a lot of scientific dialogue. I've seen researchers enter the field by responding to existing papers out there. So these are really important. They're not gathering dust in a database somewhere, especially in cellular agriculture, because the information ecosystem is so small. When I published my first paper back in 2010, the number of papers that explicitly referred to growing meat in cell culture was probably less than 3, and I'm being generous there. So this is a very huge lasting impact, building up this knowledge base for the field. When you play the long game, you also power the field's innovation engine. So we were the first real academic funder of cellular agriculture, I would like to say, and over 46 grants at 31 universities over the past 5-ish years or so, we've really created an innovation engine for the field. We have found or looked for all these kinds of researchers around the world who are excited about cellular agriculture and just needed that little bit of funding to start focusing on the work deeply. When you play the long game, you also catalyze fields, you also catalyze field growth. So if you followed New Harvest for a while, you're probably familiar with the left or right side of this slide, because in the very early days of New Harvest, we had this very light touch activity of introducing founders to one another and encouraging them to start companies. And through all of these companies that we had a very light touch in putting together, we've seen them raise over $1.19 billion for their companies, which is like gigantic, enormous impact in 5 or 6 years or so. It's crazy. These 9 companies have also created 613 industry jobs. So they've very effectively grown cellular agriculture as a field in terms of people as well. But what I'm really excited about is over on the left. In 2014, we had a lot more activities related to companies because that's just where the funding was and that's where the momentum was. But it didn't take very long for that momentum to build and for us to decide in 2015 or so that we actually needed to focus on a more neglected area than founding companies, which is academic research. That public academic work would actually bolster the work of the companies and be that ongoing engine of innovation going forward, making sure that research kept progressing, that the version 20 products were better than the version 2 products, but also creating that public data that can inform policymakers and regulators and eaters as they consume these like completely new products. So over on the left, we see that just in 2021 and 2020, we've seen $17 million come in for academic research focused on cellular agriculture. These grants are so new that it's actually hard to quantify how many people get brought in under those grants, but there are 31 faculty members on the grant applications, which probably means dozens of researchers that will be able to focus on cellular agriculture thanks to these grants. So we believe that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and we're really excited to see this kind of public piece grow because it is incredibly neglected. And in some ways, this diagram is flipped. If you looked at it for any other biotech field, you would see a lot more public R&D before the companies really started generating investment. So next slide. So I could not talk about the long game without talking about the long history of where this all came from. So these are slides actually from our 2015 fundraising deck when we decided to switch from this kind of startup-y type of activities into funding academic research. And this was kind of a crazy decision for us to make because we had maybe $30,000 or something in the bank, and funding academic research, especially biotech, is incredibly expensive. So this was a fundraising deck we put together so we could start funding research. But the kind of thesis from 2015 was that cellular agriculture had no dedicated funding. It lay at the intersection of medical science and food science, and neither of those groups were taking ownership and funding it. So I would have so many people come to me saying, I can't believe that this is not heavily funded, or that there isn't this huge research ecosystem around cellular agriculture. And it was really kind of a structural problem, like food and medicine had not really merged the way they needed to for cellular agriculture. And so our idea was that if we wanted to get cellular agriculture established, and we wanted it to actually receive government grants and real academic funding, we had to just take the risk and fund it ourselves. And that comes from the kind of incremental nature of academic research. If you are a lab that has been studying kidney function for 20 years, you're probably going to apply for grants about kidney stuff, because you won't have the data to apply for grants for liver stuff, because you just, why would you be able to receive funding for the stuff that you don't have the specialty in? So the problem with cellular agriculture is so many researchers might have come from a biomedical background. For them to just suddenly start applying for food didn't make sense. It didn't kind of add up for their trajectory of those careers. So we had to just fund cellular agriculture, take that risk so that they would be able to generate data to apply for those government grants, which would bring in future money. So we saw this thesis validated this year with the Kaplan lab, where the money that we put in was over $900,000 to fund 6 researchers since 2016. So I actually had a phone call with Kaplan back in 2015. It was a 10-minute phone call, and I said, Kaplan, can we start up a dedicated PhD cellular agriculture program at your lab? And he said yes, and that was about the end of it. But it was a very effective call. He's a very effective person. But we funded 1 researcher there, then we funded 2, then we funded 4. It's just a lab that has been so great to work with. Kaplan has been so generous with his time and energy over the years that we just couldn't help but see the momentum there and want to back up that momentum and keep supporting it until we saw that it could run kind of on its own. And so this year we saw the Kaplan Lab win a $10 million grant from the USDA to form the National Institute for Cellular Agriculture. I think this is huge in 3 different ways. One is that this is donor dollars being multiplied 10 times. Like, this is the dream of so many donors having an impact, is to see that kind of multiplicative quality out in the world. So for all of those $902,000 that went in from our donor community, we saw 10 million come out from the USDA for CellAg. That's huge. The second thing is that the USDA funded it. That's kind of an acknowledgement that this is an agriculture, the home is in agriculture to some degree. I think that's a big deal. I think this is also the tip of the iceberg when it comes to government funding coming into this lab in particular, and many more. And then the third thing I'm excited about is that it's the National Institute for Cellular Agriculture. This is kind of committing cellular agriculture as a field. So like, the field is being built now that we have an institute in place. And this is kind of just our canon of knowledge being put in place with like some brick and mortar-ness to it. So with all of this happening, why are we pushing pause? As I said earlier, in Q2 or so, we decided to push pause on our research grants and rethink them. And you might ask, why are we doing that with all this incredible success? Well, it's because the ecosystem is changing and you must adapt or die. And to use a word less gruesome than die, I think we have to adapt or be less impactful. So us changing our program is really about staying as impactful as possible. And the 2 ways that the ecosystem is changing that we need to respond to are right here. The first is there's more academic funding. The Kaplan Lab receiving $10 million, that's more money than New Harvest has ever had in our history of our existence. So of course we need to think about, how do we coexist with this lab being funded, and how do we remain impactful, work with, support other labs getting to that point in light of this huge success. So the question we have to ask in response to there being more academic funding is, what work is most neglected now? The other big thing is that industry is advancing towards market. And we've always said that industry is advancing towards market, but this year we have, over 100 companies out there in the field. Industry is advancing towards market much faster and in different ways than it was 5 years ago. So we have to ask ourselves, what work is most crucial at this point in time? What are the kind of missing data points? Who are the missing key opinion leaders? What kind of stuff do we need to make sure that whatever comes to market is the best version of itself that can have the highest impact? So, sorry, I'm too quick on the trigger here, the slides. So some ideas that we have for our new fellowship program are here, and I don't want to be too prescriptive about them because we do really want to think this through. But these are things that have been rising to the top for us. How do we support emerging leaders in neglected disciplines? So there's been quite a bit of social science work in consumer acceptance, but we haven't really seen work in agricultural and industrial policy around cellular agriculture, which could be incredibly impactful for right now. We also haven't seen much economics or law work either. Those are just 3 examples of many, many, many types of investigations into CalAg that I think would be incredibly important at this particular point in time. I also showed you that kind of global network. It's a lot of Western focused support of CalAg right now. So how do we support emerging leaders in neglected regions of the world, acknowledging that cellular agriculture is a tool for making food? It is not burgers and nuggets. It is a tool for making burgers and nuggets as much as it is a tool for creating all kinds of other culturally appropriate foods. So how do we ensure that it remains a tool that any culture could apply to their foods and their cultures wherever they are in the world? And then lastly, how do we support emerging leaders in neglected initiatives that work towards the public good? This was kind of our catch-all for stuff that we don't know that we need. Examples of this that have kind of popped up for us is, what would it look like to have a workers' union in cellular agriculture? Who would run such a thing? What would it look like? How would it make our field a much better field? What about nonprofit organizations that exist in these other regions of the world that are trying to bolster cellular agriculture where they are? We just want to create an open door to better understand what these kind of neglected initiatives might be and who those people are that need empowerment. Another thing we're thinking about is potentially decoupling the fellowship experience from grant funding. So right now, when we fund researchers, it's support in terms of experience and money. Potentially, if there is already monetary support in the world, maybe there's a way for us to create that experiential fellowship and support in different ways where we can plug people into our kind of global network and support them that way. And then last but not least, I think this is why we need to take the time to think this through, is what does an effective transdisciplinary environment look like? What does the room actually look like where all of these different types of people come together? So this is the stuff that's on our mind for 2022. Now, it may seem weird to talk about this program here, but we decided to do a very crazy thing and launch a program during our end of year fundraising time of year, which is a very, very insane thing to do. But our Science Catalyst program is $50,000 that we have in support from Robert Downey Jr.'s Footprint Coalition to fund projects of less than 1 year, less than $5,000 dedicated to cellular agriculture. And we are open to funding any type of project, but we especially wanted to test out some projects in the social sciences and get a kind of better understanding for the social science landscape out there. So if you are someone who wants to do a CalAg project of around this size, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us. We're happy to help you talk through your project and maybe even steer it in a way that could be highly effective. So please consider reaching out. 2022, I have no idea how we're doing for timing. Not well. but well, I just have one slide, so 2 slides. So I'm just going to do a brief overview. When it comes to mobilizing the ecosystem, we are going to continue our listening campaign, as I mentioned earlier, beyond the CELAG stakeholders to these kind of CELAG adjacent stakeholders. So the people who just want to know more, who may be critical of a field also. We just need to listen and get a better sense of where the field is headed so we can respond accordingly. We also want to bring back the New Harvest Conference in person next year. After 2 years, no conference, and deciding not to do digital either, we're really excited to bring this back in person in New York in summertime. So please keep a tab on our channels and our newsletter for more updates on that. And then when it comes to collective value creation, we're going to be onboarding a lot more collaborative projects, as I mentioned, especially in Europe and Asia. We also want to keep following that safety work. We realize that the safety initiative has only created more interest in advancing safety. And so we're just going to keep following that and pursuing more collaborations that advance our understanding of safety. There's still a lot of safety research to be done. Another thing we're thinking about is developing an open access fund. So our commitment to open is actually really, really hard to put into practice because our world is not that open of a place. And publications in particular, for them to remain open, sometimes there's these random surprise open access fees you have to pay. So rather than us being caught off surprise and having to fund these kind of one at a time, we want to dedicate a fund towards keeping everything open, not just those publications, but other kinds of things that we generate, whether it be publication or a textbook or a video. This will just kind of cover us in terms of those expenses that pop up. And then the last thing in this is more of a intention than a real solid sense of how to do it, but the field is in a position where it needs to be standardized and normed. In order for us to become a real field with a proper supply chain and for there to be media companies and cell companies and companies that sell products to customers, we do need to have a sense of standards and norms, whether that be an understanding of what a meat cell is or what our media needs to be and what's allowed and what's not allowed in our media. It's just very important for where the field is right now and for us to be able to bring products to market and really support ecosystem growth rather than very vertical integration type of growth. And the last thing with empowering emerging leaders, I already spoke to how we want to re-envision our fellowship and grants, but I do want to emphasize that we are continuing to support our grantees. And we have so many grantees on board right now. We have to still pay out over $1.5 million in grants over the next 2 to 3 years or so. So we are very much committed to our scientific base right now. That's not going to change or go anywhere. I just wanted to emphasize that our re-envisioning is about how do we support that and more. Next slide. The most important slide is how you can help. So all of the work that New Harvest has done so far has been powered by donors. We are not a nonprofit that was founded with a benefactor or a foundation. We are really a people-funded organization. And the single most effective way to support our work long-term is by becoming a monthly donor. And if you sign up today, your first 2 months will be doubled by a generous matching gift donor. So this is a donor who is very adamant that this be a true gift match. We have $11,000 that he is willing to put in if we are able to find the match for it, which we will not get if we're not able to find the match for it. So if you have been thinking about giving to New Harvest for a long time and wasn't sure when to make the commitment, I would say now is a great time. We really need your support. And I show you this graph because this year has actually been kind of harder for us. In terms of our estimations for where we would be at this time of year, we are a little bit behind. So we want to raise over $500,000 in the next month. We know that 30% of all online donations come in the month of December. So now is really the best time to give. If you love our work, if you love anything that I talked about today, I'd highly encourage you to jumpstart our giving season and make a donation to New Harvest.